Kevin Gallagher, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us from Beijing.
It's great to talk to you again, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. The event is wrapped up. It was a hectic past couple of days. Give us your big takeaway from the forum.
Well, it was quite an opportunity to be able to be there firsthand. I was actually in the Great Hall for President Xi's unraveling of his, or unveiling, I should say, of the new 8-point plan for the next decade, and saw the speeches of some of the big heads of state there at the Great Hall. And then I spent the second half of the day where there were thematic major events. I was part of the green development, which is one of the 8 planks of the new plan, and a number of heads of state were there, as well as, finance ministers and environment ministers. And what I was struck by the most, I guess, is beyond the headlines and beyond the big fanfare of the big 4 conversations or speeches from heads of state in the beginning at the Great Hall, is that all the conversation was much more practical and about infrastructure and connectivity. You had heads of state and finance ministers and environment ministers thanking and praising the first decade of the BRI and wanting to get in on the next decade even more. They expressed that they need more infrastructure. They need more financing, not the way we often see it sometimes when we're just looking at this stuff from the outside.
You and your team at the Global Development Policy Center have been writing for much of the past year about this new small is beautiful era of Chinese development financing. And that is this smaller connectivity, green tech, and yet President Xi, he announced a $100 billion pledge to the Belt and Road. So that seems a little bit incongruent to me. What was your reaction to that pledge?
Yeah, I was struck, especially given what's going on in the Chinese economy and the relatively limited ability of developing countries to absorb new finance. But just as he did at the very first Belt Road Forum, he has injected major capital infusions to the 2, now 3, I guess I would say, the 3 big sort of flagships of the BRI. He pledged new capital or new financing, we're not quite sure right now, for the China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China, each about $50 billion each, about 80 billion renminbi, or about $10 billion of new capital for the Silk Road Fund. So that implies that, leveraging that, we should see more of an uptick in new finance moving forward. And so that contrasts with some of the conversations about small is beautiful. In conversations with friends here, we've been told that the small is beautiful is a little bit more the track for the GDI and some of those initiatives, and that the BRI may snap back to be bigger, and let's hope it's bigger and better.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. That's a level of nuance that I don't think we've heard before. So that's very helpful to understand. So finally, very quickly, because I know you have to get going, we saw all the speeches and we read all the headlines and we saw the Putin handshakes and, the big takeaways. And you mentioned that in your conversations with some of the folks from Central Asia and from some of the other regions, that there was a very different narrative than what we saw in the media. And I'm curious just to hear about what was the buzz in the room, when you were on your coffee breaks and in the hallways. What were people talking about?
Yeah, it's not surprising that given what's going on in the world, what the global, especially Western take has been on it. And China shouldn't expect much more given the fact that that's how they staged it. But it stands in stark contrast with the conversations in the room. Everyone's talking about new connectivity. China unveiled just a parade of new, smaller initiatives. I think the one that is really being missed on the headlines, which really might do wonders combined with all this new capital infusion from the China Development Bank and the other big institutions, is that China unveiled something called a JITP, the Chinese answer or complement to the JETP. The JIFP stands for the Green Innovation Finance Platform, which is a platform so that they can help make green and bankable projects for developing countries under the BRI, and then work with Chinese financial institutions to tailor each project with the right amount of debt and equity and grants and so forth to make sure it's truly bankable, and it helps both the developing country and Chinese balance sheets. And so this is, I guess, in some level, a small is beautiful, or maybe a big is beautiful approach, where you see China knowing that they need to do a little bit more due diligence moving forward. The next decade, especially under the new context of higher for normal interest rates, can't just be debt for countries, but the demand is there on the sidelines and in the copy. Everyone's talking about the new roads that they need, the new rail that they need, the new power plants that they need. But this time they want them to be have more due diligence when it comes to debt and environmental impact, and want clean energy rather than coal plants. And mechanisms like this are clearly China trying to treble the next decade to make sure that the host countries are, have that kind of due diligence in there. So both the host country and China doesn't take a bath on some of these projects. And so that's just one example of a lot of other concrete things that got rolled out, which unfortunately, because of the way that they staged the whole thing, those stories are going to trickle out much more slowly. But at the coffee tables, or tea tables, I should say, here at the convention, it's amazing how different the conversation is. It was sort of appreciative that there's actually real money out there that they don't feel like they're getting in other places in the international system, and just wanting it to be better and more troubled, and certainly not wanting it to stop.
Kevin Gallagher is the director of Boston University's Global Development Policy Center. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time on a very, very busy day for you, and safe travels back to the U.S.
Thanks so much, Eric. Talk to you soon.